I think that's going. Ah, there we go. Oh, again, good evening, all. Looking forward to our ongoing discussion. Well, there we go. We will be in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 10, for our main scripture to be considering this evening. You know, it used to be a thing, I remember back in the day, when preachers would fuss about those kind of preachers who they would get their messages from the morning paper and just preach against the headlines and the way of the world and all that stuff. So what are we doing here on our Wednesday night services? We're teaching through the headlines. But hopefully finally finding a biblical perspective on all of that. And not just talking about how bad the world is getting, knowing that God is working out some good things as well. So get my screen share going here. At this point in time, we are taking a look at the Bible and the Josiah Manifesto. Book that came out in September by a Messianic Jewish Rabbi, Jonathan Cahn. We've been looking at all his stuff. And if y'all want anyone to blame Sister Rhonda, because she and Brother Chris got me one of his books once upon a time, and that's where it all started. I guarantee it was Chris who picked it out. I wouldn't be surprised either. So what we are looking at with this book, and again, everything we do, don't take his word for anything, don't take my word for anything, come to your own conclusions and convictions. This is just stuff for us to be considering, to be talking about as we look at the things that he's presenting, his use of the scriptures and his seeing of some timing and applications of scriptures in modern events that are playing out. We can agree or disagree with the connections, but if nothing else comes out of it, we get some exposure to scripture that we don't often look at, and we are a little more mindful about current events that are happening, recognizing there is a spirit at work behind the scenes underneath it all. And it's always the spiritual that we want to be focused on. So with that, the Josiah Manifesto, as I've mentioned, I picked up 4 basic streams of thought or patterns in this book that are being brought out and kind of all coming to a head at the event we've been looking at the last couple of weeks. One is the parallel of the life of Moses. Another is King Jehu of Israel, who we're going to read about again in 2 Kings 10. Next is the prophet Joel. And lastly is King Josiah of Judah, of course, for whom the book is named. And so let's see, where do I want to go from here? Let's do this. To refresh us, we left off on well, let me do a little backup first. The main event that we've come to, kind of everything coming together, was on Saturday, September 26th of 2020. Now, what had happened on that day, Jonathan Cahn and others had booked an event, a revival event called The Return on the National Mall, right in front of the U.S. Capitol, facing the Washington Monument. They had to book it in 2 years in advance in 2018. So they have this event. They've got hundreds of thousands of people there, millions watching online. And one of the things that he does at this event is has the blowing of the trumpets, the shofars, the ram's horns. And with that, he does 7 blasts and has the final blast with several at once, similar to what happened at Jericho. And in fact, that's one of the things I want to touch about. Here's something he says, and we'll get to 2 Kings 10 here in a bit after this. He makes this observation. In the Bible, the sound of the trumpet marks not only the appointed times of God, but the appointed moments. The shofars of Jericho are an example of it. It was at the exact moment of the blast that the walls fell down. So too in the book of Revelation. 7 angels are shown sounding 7 trumpets. The blasts are matched by an immediate corresponding event in the heavens or on the earth. So very significant that something happens at the moment these blasts take place. So with that, let me go to here. And here is, this is a bit of a refresh for some, but there we go. Here is
out there, you're
okay. Okay, they're going to do the commercial again after all. I tried to fast forward through that, but okay.
Drinking warm water before bed
Yes.
resets blood sugar levels and
happy to hear
reverses
that.
type 2.
3, 2, 1,
Thousands
skip.
of-
There we go.
Lift it up, but point it upward.
Okay.
And we're
So what we're going to see here is at this event, there's the US Capitol behind him. We're going to see the blasting of the trumpets. Now, again, my apologies for those online. Zoom hates music, so you won't get the sound, but you'll get the effect here, as you see.
okay. All right. We are now, you have you ready, guys? You've been wanting to do this. This is about the power of God. So listen, I'm gonna ask two things. They're gonna blast all at once, however many shofars we have out there. You're lifted up, but pointed upward. And we're gonna go full blast, the power of God all at once. And you also, people of God, you don't have a shofar? You got a voice. Shout to the Lord. Ready? And we'll just keep doing it for a little while. Ready, everybody? All right. From here, Lord, as we seal the return and the power of God. Now, Lord, let the sound of your power go forth to the world. In Jesus, Yeshua's name, go. Hallelujah.
Okay, we get the idea. Am I the only one who just thought that sounds like a bunch of elephants? Yes, great point. Great point. So yeah, so this is something that's impactful. So again, the question is, if that Bible pattern holds, will something else happen at the very moment the trumpets are sounded? Now, remember, the whole thing we've been looking at is 2020 is the Jubilee anniversary of the introduction of abortion on demand, legal first in the States in 1970, and then handed down as a ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 with Roe v. Wade. So 1970 was the start, and Jubilee is this year, 2020. So we're seeing about prayers for the undoing of abortion, the reversal of this trend that has taken our nation in this direction. So the trumpets that we see here, the trumpet blasts at exactly 5 o'clock and 4 minutes and 33 seconds PM. Does something else initiate at exactly 5 o'clock, 4 minutes and 33 seconds PM? Let's take a look here. Move you out the way a bit. And that will bring us to this slide right over here.
All over the earth, God is
Oh, another ad.
raising up a new breed of
4,
wealth
3,
builders who will
2,
use their money to shape the course of
1,
world history.
0, skip.
Wait a minute.
Okay, so let's take it 23. Right about there, that's fine. Okay, so he's gonna show up on a screen here, his event and something else taking place just around the corner at the very same moment in time, and he's gonna have a clock under each one running simultaneously. So here we go.
We're at the return. We're on the National Mall, and they're getting ready. The trumpeters. On the other side is Donald Trump at the White House. So if we have the film, we can roll it. From here, Lord, as we seal the return and the power of God. Now, Lord, let the sound of your power go forth to the world. In Jesus, Yeshua's name, go.
Stand before you today to fulfill one of my highest and most important duties under the United States Constitution, the nomination of a Supreme Court Justice.
That is the power of our God. Our God is alive. That is the power. God is amazing. Now, I say, God, that was amazing. But you could have done something better. You see, it's always good to correct God because he's going to correct you. I said, Lord, that was so perfect. But when I called up the men, there were 6 trumpets. It would have been nicer if there were 7. Jericho, 7. 7 trumpets. If we had a 7th trumpet, it'd be just like Jericho. And then all of a sudden it came and hit me. Wait a minute. There was a 7th trumpet. What is the name of your president? Trump. He was the 7th trumpet. The trump was the trumpet, and the trump sounded when I said sound of the trumpets. God is amazing. And God has a sense of humor too.
Yes, that he does. So what is significant about this, let me go over here and just kind of funny inside story. I did the painstaking work of putting this together before I discovered he already did. Yeah, go figure. So at this moment, 5 p.m., 4 minutes and 33 seconds, Trump begins to speak and announce Amy Coney Barrett as his nominee for the Supreme Court. She is the one who will cast the deciding vote in overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, I've talked about the parallels, Moses, Jehu, Joel, and Josiah, and we'll get to 2 Kings 10 here. So, Moses was a child who was supposed to die when a death decree was announced in his land. He did not die under that death decree. In fact, he grew up to be the one to overturn events in the nation that had made that decree. Amy Coney Barrett is born in that time frame from 1970 to 1973, when abortion on demand is becoming legalized in the states and then through the nation with Roe v. Wade. She is born. She could have been one of the babies killed in that time frame, and she happened not to be. So like Moses, she survives that and grows up to actually be the one who could have been a victim, to be the one to have a hand in overturning the nation's direction that had issued that death decree. King Jehu, President Trump has been paralleling him, and we've seen some things like that. We'll see some more here in 2 Kings chapter 10. Joel, the book of Joel prophesies about a need for a national assembly and coming together and praying and blowing the trumpets and seeking the Lord, which is what they were doing here at this event called the Return. And as was mentioned, a reminder too, this time frame in September on the Hebrew calendar, this is during a 10-day span called the Days of Awe, A-W-E. The first day, Tishri the first, is the Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, Feast of Trumpets. And from there to the 10 days to day 10, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, are very serious days for the Jewish people and the people of the Bible, where they are repenting and seeking the Lord, drawing closer to him, and getting ready for a time of judgment, and judgment being handed down. In fact, those are some of the Jewish prayers outside the Bible that are offered involving that. What's interesting about this is they pray for the removal of the evil decree. And we've seen some of the timing and other things we've looked at, along with the Hebrew dates in the book of Esther, with the reversal of an evil decree against the people. What's interesting about this is that on Tishri the first, on the Feast of the Trumpets, the day that the judgment begins, and where they're praying for the removal of the evil decree, Justice Ruth Gator Ginsburg passed from this earth that very night. And it was announced at sunset after evening when the day had started. And so paving the way for her replacement on the Supreme Court, who will be casting that deciding vote. And so the Saturday in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Tishri 1 and Tishri 10, wherever the Saturday falls between there, that's a special day called Shabbat Shuvah, the Sabbath that is the day of the return. They had named this event the Return without realizing that it's going to fall on that day. And so this is a very special Sabbath where they have some specific prayers and everything, and a day of returning to God in preparation for that Day of Atonement that's coming up on the 10th. So all these things are playing in together, and all of this is happening right as we are seeing all these different things come together. Moses, Jehu, Joel, and I mentioned Josiah. The book is named after. The cover of the book shows the broken altar. As we've talked in the last few weeks, the altar of Baal in America has been the Roe v. Wade ruling allowing for the sacrifice of children for the sake of personal convenience, etc. And so with what happens here, this is the beginning of the breaking of that altar. And so the Josiah example is as he in his lifetime broke down altars that were contrary to God. So too, in our aiming towards the end times, our call is to be breaking down altars that are lifted up contrary to God. Sister Ashley.
But they're still fighting abortion at the state.
Oh, absolutely.
State level. So.
This was the start. It had to be broken up at the national level so it could be addressed at the states.
Because I mean, there's some states that, are enshrining it in their
Oh, yeah.
state constitutions
And some will.
there's some states that are, have different things that they're trying to, different requirements or whatever. I mean, so
Yeah.
there's not gonna be any kind of a consensus, a
Oh,
national,
no.
a national
Oh, no.
law or anything like that.
I couldn't agree more, sad to say. Yeah, one of the big misunderstandings and the panic when the Dobbs versus Jackson ruling was handed out was that where Roe v. Wade, and again, Supreme Court rulings are just that, they're rulings, they're not law. Laws come from the Congress. And so the ruling basically said that the states could not outlaw abortion. When that got overturned, people panicked and thought, oh my gosh, now no one can get an abortion. That's not what overturning Roe v. Wade did. Roe v. Wade just prevented states, if they so choose, to from banning abortion. Now states can ban abortion. States who don't want to ban abortion can keep abortion. So it just basically knocked it down to the state level. My personal conviction, I know this is a big deal with the presidential election coming up. The topic of abortion is, and again, a hot and heavy one. And so there's some fear mongering. Oh my gosh, those guys on that side, they want to pass laws outlawing abortion entirely and all that stuff. And so you don't want those guys in power. And of course, we see on the other side that they are pro-abortion right up to birth and infanticide and all that stuff on the other extreme. So my personal conviction under God and as an American is our nation's founding from the 1600s up to the Revolution and forward was a nation devoted to God. From John Winthrop and the City on the Hill with the Massachusetts Bay Colony, all those things forward, especially our defining document. There's no constitution without the Declaration of Independence. In fact, it's been said that the Declaration is the heart of the Constitution. It's like our mission statement, and then the Constitution's like our bylaws, but it's based in that. And in the Declaration of Independence, it says, all men, referring to all people, are created equal. It doesn't say born equal. It says created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And so with that, we know that creation of life happens at conception. We know that scientifically, instant that happens, there's a unique set of DNA different from the mother and different from the father. Life is there. It's not a question of viability that continues to improve with science and technology. This is a case of God-given life. So my conviction, all that to say, my conviction is it's unconstitutional because the Constitution is based on protecting the things in the Declaration. Abortion is unconstitutional. It is depriving life, liberty, and happiness for those who are aborted. So from my conviction, I understand that it's a good thing that the overturning of Roe v. Wade broke it up at a national level and now different states are dealing with it. I personally don't even think it's a state issue. I think it's a federal issue that all life is to be protected. My personal conviction. So with that, and again, please continue to share your thoughts and reactions and comments as we go here. And we're moving forward into where we left off last week with Jehu doing some things that caused some more controversy because that's what Jehu does in the Bible and in present times. So all these different factors come together here at this moment. And now we move into the new year of 2021. And as we saw, we had the Democrat-run Congress in session. They start their session before the inauguration of the president. So this is earlier in January 3rd. The inauguration is January 20th. So on January 3rd, we saw Representative Emmanuel Cleaver stand before everyone with Moses looking down at him from the top of the building there in the chamber. And he dedicated the session of Congress that was starting this year to the god Brahma, who's a pagan Indian god. And so
that was the thing you saw last week.
that was-
that.
yes.
Okay, yeah. He was praying, but then he said that thing at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And then amen and a women, but
Ugh.
yeah. But he dedicated this session of Congress to Brahma and try to equate him with the monotheistic God. Well, Brahma is not a monotheistic God. He's part of the pantheism of Hinduism. And so very much pagan God, and goes to show with the agenda that this new session of Congress has. Very contrary to the Bible. In fact, let's get you out of the way now. Let's go to 740. That's video that. Let's see. Let's go to 2 Kings. Let's go ahead and read here, 2 Kings 10. Let's pick up here. And again, we're going to see Jehu being paralleled by President Trump. And again, God uses people often without their even realizing it. But we'll see a pattern here. 2 Kings 10:15. Now referring to King Jehu here. 2 Kings 10:15. Now when he had gone from there, he encountered Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him and said to him, "Is your heart right, just as my heart is with your heart?" And Jehonadab answered, "It is." Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." And he gave him his hand, and he pulled him up to him in the chariot. Then he said, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." So he had him ride in his chariot. And pause there. Jehonadab is the family of the Rechabites. These were a family that God himself bragged on to the Israelites because their father had put the family under a vow that they were going to be following God very earnestly and intently, to the point where they were going to abstain from alcohol and all sorts of other things. And the family faithfully did it. And God praised them and said, "Look, these men are faithful to their father. Why are my people not faithful to me, their father?" And said, because of their faithfulness, they will not lack a man to stand before me. So this guy, Jehonadab of these Rechabites, he's recognized as what we might call a religious conservative. So Jehu has a religious conservative join him in his chariot on his way to the capital. The modern Jehu did the same thing. He had a religious conservative join him in his vehicle as he went to the White House, and that was Mike Pence. And so there's a parallel there. Let's keep on. So verse 17, when he came to Samaria, he killed all who remained to Ahab in Samaria till he had eliminated them in accordance with the word of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. By defeating Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election, President Trump was basically ending the influence of, in the executive branch side, of the Ahab Jezebel Baal sacrifice issue. And in fact, the first book of his that I read, thanks to the Butlers, dealt with the modern Ahab and Jezebel and the parallel there, and that parallel being Bill and Hillary Clinton. And so we see all that playing out, and Jehu's dealing with them, and God using Jehu to remove their influence. But now we get down to verse 18, which is going to take us into January of 2021. 2 Kings 10:18. Some things will be very obvious, some things will not be, and not everything applies, but there's enough that does. 2 Kings 10:18. Then Jehu gathered all the people and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little, Jehu will serve him much. Now summon to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshipers and all his priests. Let no one go missing, because I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing it shall not live." But Jehu did it in deception, in order to eliminate the worshipers of Baal. And Jehu said, "Proclaim a holy assembly for Baal." And they proclaimed it. Then Jehu sent word throughout Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was not a person left who did not come. And when they entered the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. And he said to the one who was in charge of the wardrobe, "Bring out garments for all the worshipers of Baal." So he brought out the garments for them. Then Jehu entered the house of Baal with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, And he said to the worshipers of Baal, search carefully, see to it that there is here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but only the worshipers of Baal. Then they entered to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu stationed for himself 80 men outside, and he had said, the one who allows any of the men whom I bring into your hands to escape shall give up his life in exchange. Then it came about, soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the royal officers, go in, kill them, let none come out. So they killed them with the edge of the sword. The guard and the royal officers threw them out and went to the sanctuary of the house of Baal. They brought out the memorial stones of the house of Baal and burned them. They also tore down the memorial stone of Baal, tore down the house of Baal, and made it a latrine as it is this day. So Jehu eradicated Baal from Israel. Yeah. As my 8th grade history teacher said, you want sex and violence, read the Bible. So what we see here is Jehu wiping out the Baal worship. We see assemblies here in the capital of Samaria. And so what's going on with this is, let's take a look at a couple different pieces here. So as we've seen, the new Democratic-controlled Congress is bringing to Capitol Hill an agenda standing in stark opposition to biblical morality and values. So we're talking about examples like sexuality, religious freedom, gender, the lives of unborn children. This new Congress comes to the Capitol building prepared to enact the most pro-abortion agenda in American history. Now let's reread again verse 22. And he said to the one who is in charge of the wardrobe, bring out garments for all the worshipers of Baal. So he brought out the garments for them. Take a look at this. You may have seen this before. Here they are sitting in a session of Congress, and a bunch of them wearing white. And your new senator right there. And so, what is with this? White is a symbol of purity. This is actually in protest against the current president at the time here, the outgoing president, actually. And so this protest is pro-women's rights, including abortion, which is really the underlying issue here. So this is basically putting on garments in favor of child sacrifice. Verse 22 said again, he said to the one who was in charge of the wardrobe, bring out garments for all the worshipers of Baal. Here are the worshipers of child sacrifice wearing a united garment here in the house of the temple in the Capitol. So that didn't come from Jonathan Cahn. That's my own little brain there, thinking about that. But it's not only the prayer of the guy, Emmanuel Cleaver, who prayed to Brahma, but it's the agenda. Here we are this first week in 2021. This agenda is taking full control of Capitol Hill and the temple of the American Republic, the U.S. Capitol that the event, the return, was done in front of. That U.S. Capitol is often referred to as the Temple of America. That's our sanctuary. That's where our business takes place. That is it. Sacred ground. Yeah, exactly. We're going to actually talk about that. You're right. So, and this is all happening, remember, when a Jehu is still in power and in the capital city. So as we see in this ancient template, this battle is waiting to happen. So as we saw in the 10th chapter of 2 Kings, Jehu calls for an assembly in the capital city. So a couple days later, we have an assembly in the capital city on January 6th. Jehu's gathering was ultimately directed at the National Temple in the capital city. Trump's gathering of January 6th, likewise, is directed on America's National Temple, the Capitol building. Now, the ancient template centers on there are two gatherings, if you notice, two groups of people gathered in the city. Priests and worshipers of Baal convening inside the temple, and the supporters of Jehu standing outside the temple. So on January 6th, the gathering that convenes inside the Capitol building represent the victory of the anti-biblical agenda. Gathering taking place outside the Capitol building represents the supporters of the modern day Jehu, Trump. Everyone good so far?
Just, it just seems like a big coincidence, I've said this before,
Mhm.
because President Trump is so controversial.
So was Jehu.
Anyone else in the world, could probably fit better than people would see, because it's President Trump, and he's hated by Christians
Yep.
who know these words, these words.
They don't understand it.
He's hated by people who don't care about, these words. But January 6th was, that was tough.
Yes, it was.
That was tough because there were some bad people.
No question.
There were some very bad people that were doing things.
Absolutely. But that's enough about the FBI.
Oh. Sound like a conspiracy theorist, Eric.
Conspiracy theory is Hillary Clinton's phrase. Vast right-wing conspiracy. There is that.
So what we do see here, the Bible tells us both Jehu and his partner Jehonadab play a prominent role in what happens in the Temple of Baal. So both Trump and Pence play a prominent role in what happens in January 6th in the Capitol building, again, America's national temple. In the Bible, ancient template here, both Jehu and Jehonadab go to Baal's temple. Trump actually planned to go down to Capitol building this day, but his security team prevents him. Pence, the modern day Jehonadab, does indeed enter the national temple this day in accordance with the paradigm. It's worth noting, we can assume that Jehonadab here in 2 Kings 10 left the building after entering it, but we're not told that specifically. On January 6th, Pence entered the Capitol building, but didn't end up getting to leave. He ended up staying through the night. So let's check this out right here. Just a little beginning here. Hopefully we won't get yet another ad. Everything.
TurboTax Live, full
Yeah, there's
service.
another ad.
Take taxes off your
Yeah.
plate. A local tax expert will do your taxes start to finish. Imagine having your taxes done and off your mind the same day you start. 100%
This
accurate.
class has
That's
been brought to you
TurboTax
by-
Live, full service.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
So that was his intent. That's different from Jehu, because Jehu sent them in to go wipe out the Baal worshipers, where our modern Jehu took a different path and he said, no, go peacefully and patriotically protest, but don't do anything else. So in the ancient template, Jehu directs the multitude of his supporters to go to the temple of Baal, stand outside it, and then he sends them in. On January 6th, Trump directs the multitude of his supporters to go to the Capitol building and stand outside to protest. Now, after the events take place, to Sister Minnie's point, after the January 6th events, let's see, the incoming Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, says, quote, "This temple to democracy was desecrated." Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, speaking that night from Capitol Hill, says, "This sacred place was desecrated. This temple to democracy was defiled." The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, speaks of those who engaged in the desecration of this our temple. So here they're referring to this building, rightfully, understandably so, as a temple. And in the Bible, that's exactly what happened. It was a temple that had been given over to Baal. And so too, our capital had been given over to Baal, with not only the prayer dedicated to Brahma, but also the agenda being brought in.
That's interesting. That's an interesting choice of words.
Oh,
Right?
well, especially considering 2 Kings 10 and the temple.
Yeah.
So let's see here.
Person was a reporter
Ah,
who said sacred ground.
So he's probably either quoting someone else or just echoing the same sentiment. There we go. Now, in the wake of January 6th, the government begins its crackdown against those involved. with breaching the Capitol building. At the end of the week, the Washington, D.C. Police Department announces the number of those they arrest in connection with the Capitol Hill riot. That number makes the headlines, and we have that headline right here. 80 arrested for civil unrest at the U.S. Capitol around D.C. No, thank you. There we see all that. There's a Google document with details about the 80 arrests being made. Yeah. So we've got 80 arrested. So the number of those connected to the siege of the Capitol building is 80. The ancient template in the Bible gives the number of Jehu's men who laid siege to the temple of Baal, two Hebrew words, Shmonim Ish. What's the translation of Shmonim Ish to give us that number? Well, we can read it in English, 2 Kings 10:24. 2 Kings 10:24, they entered the offer sacrifices, burnt offerings. The Jehu stationed for himself 80 men outside. So in the ancient template, the exact same number. So this is not something, of
Yeah.
course.
Because they went on to arrest more.
Yeah,
Than that.
but this was the announcement. This was the first initial wave of this happening. So 80 in the headline right there in print and 80 in your Bible right there. Yeah. So that is that. So now let's move on to the eventual overturning of Roe v. Wade that we're aiming towards here, and the impact of that, and the connection to that, and COVID, and abortion, and all of that. So, Amy Coney Barrett, 7 times 7 years from the day of her birth, brings us to January 28th of 2021. So now here she is in session. Oh, don't do that to me. You were working just fine earlier. I even did a test run of this stuff. Okay. We'll come back to that. So this day, January 28th of 2021, marks the completion of her 49th year. She just turned 49, so she'd lived 49 years. That's the beginning of her 50th year, her Jubilee year. 3 months after being sworn into the court, her Jubilee year begins. And so the great majority of her first year on the Supreme Court is her year of Jubilee. And it's now, in her Jubilee year, the Supreme Court takes up the case of Dobbs versus Jackson. The court announced it will take up Roe v. Wade in the month of May. The court announces it will take up Dobbs versus Jackson 50 years later in the month of May, May of 2021. Same court, same act, same subject matter. 3 months after being sworn into the court, her Jubilee year begins. And her first years on the court, most of it's in her Jubilee. And we are taking up the case of Dobbs versus Jackson here in May. So all this coming together now brings us into what also coincidentally is the Sabbath year that started in 2021, ended in 2022, September to September-ish. So when in 1971 did Roe v. Wade receive its first Supreme Court hearing? It was in December of 1971. One Jubilee forward brings us to December 2021. When does Dobbs versus Jackson receive its hearing? December of 2021. The Jubilee in case, 50 years after abortion, is heard in the 50th year of the case it is to annul. In its Jubilee and month, within 12 days of the 50-year mark, the 50-year culmination point. When the case receives its hearing December 21, it is heard before Amy Coney Barrett in her Jubilee year. Let's actually look at this Jubilee stuff again. Let's go to Leviticus 25. Just a quick refresher here. Leviticus 25. Let's pick it up in verse 8. Leviticus 25:8. You are also to count off 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years, that is 49 years. You shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, you shall sound a horn all through your land. So you shall consecrate the 50th year, proclaim release throughout the land to all its inhabitants. That phrase from the Bible right there is what's written on the Liberty Bell in America. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his own property. Each of you shall return to his family. You shall have the 50th year as a jubilee. You shall not sow nor harvest its aftergrowth, nor gather grapes from its untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field. And it goes on from there. So this 50-year mark after the completion of the 49th year, now starting the 50th year, is a celebration. There are lots of different synonym words to it that each have kind of different applications. It's a revival, it's a return, it's a restoration. What's been lost is restored, and when you've been separated from home, you come back, as we've seen with the Jubilee timing of the wars of from 1917 with World War I to 1967 with the 6-Day War to 2017 with the capital being recognized at Jerusalem, all these different things happening in this Jubilee cycle. So the pattern of the Bible is very specific. Now, as I've mentioned before, the law of Moses has been set aside. Jesus Christ fulfilled it, satisfied it where no one else could. So what's the point of this stuff now? Israel itself is not under the law of Moses, so to speak. Of course, they don't recognize Christ fully and completely yet. That day is coming. But why do we care about the law of Moses if we've never been under it? What we care about is the author, not Moses, but God. Remember, Moses just took dictation. This is from God. And God is always true to his character. And these principles don't change. And God's methods, I mean, some of the details might change in different circumstances and timing in different seasons, but that's not a contradiction. That's God's consistent character through the different environments and circumstances and seasons. What God is faithful to do is provide patterns so his hand can be recognized. And so just as I like to say, oftentimes artists with paintings, you'll see they've got a little signature, their initials or something somewhere. They've got a unique way of signing their handiwork. I have seen and kind of recognized here a pattern of God signing his handiwork, not in secret. It's there to be seen if you know the patterns to be seen. And he doesn't make it difficult or rocket science. 7, okay, that's pretty obvious. 50, that's an easy number. And so we see these things playing out. We see maybe God's doing something here. What I don't want to do is over spiritualize things. I don't want to say every time we see the number 7, oh my gosh, God's doing something. Or every time we see the number 50, ooh, something's coming back, something's getting returned. No. As Jonathan Cahn himself says, we don't put God in a box. We don't say, oh, because it's Sabbath year, something's going to happen. Lots of Sabbath years have gone by, nothing's happened. God isn't required to act or do something every Sabbath year, every Jubilee year. But what we have observed is that when he chooses to act, when he sees fit to act, more often than not, it does happen to fall within one of those. So the likelihood of something happening during those times is more than often than not. But it's just something not to, again, put God in a box or be too legalistic with, but just be mindful that, again, spirit behind the scenes of all of this. This is bigger than presidents. This is bigger than politicians and Congress leaders. This is about people and their God. People who had dedicated themselves to God, fallen away from God, God calling them back, which is throughout the Old Testament. And in fact, the New Testament is Christ is still bringing his people back to him. Sister Minnie.
In the cool book, they have something called the mystery quilt. Now, in this mystery quilt, nobody has the same fabric, but they all have the same pattern. They don't know what the pattern is. They do one at a time until they get to the end, and then they can see the pattern. And they bring it in to show to everybody else, the ones who have made it, and they're all different, but they're all the same pattern. And I think that's a good analysis of the way God does things over time.
Yeah.
He uses the same pattern, but there are different ages, different people, different things happening, but it's the same pattern.
You know, sometimes when we're trying to fall asleep at night or we wake up in the middle of the night, we're trying to fall back asleep, Ashley will throw on a YouTube video and we're watching people doing quilts and sewing and things. And yeah, it'll put me right to sleep. But one of the things that I remember from just the other night or morning was these two ladies, mother and the daughter, were they Mississippi? Missouri. Yes, yes. Want to give credit where it's due. They talked about, let's take the same pattern and just change out the colors. And I was amazed at how stark the difference was. Exact same pattern, just different colors. So things that might seem totally unrelated to each other because we're looking at the colors, well, let's step back and do we see the pattern? And again, not to over spiritualize everything, but let's not be completely oblivious to the spirit going on behind the scenes of things as well. So it kind of makes sense.
What I was gonna say was, God doesn't have to do everything exactly the same.
Right, right. Well, he saved me on a Wednesday, so that means he's going to save you on a Wednesday. No, no. Let's not limit God. Okay, if he surprises, that's a good thing. Amen. So absolutely beautiful when our hearts are humble enough and open enough to see him, not gullible enough to believe anyone and anything. Again, I encourage you in these Wednesday night sessions to be a, how do I phrase it? An open-minded skeptic. Come in, don't just believing anything because he says it or I say it. I don't agree with everything he says. And I'll let you know where I have differences of opinions and convictions from him. Always go with the Bible, and your spirit-led understanding of the Bible trumps everything else. Yeah, trumps, yes.
I don't do nothing. Except Bigfoot.
Yes.
I was watching one of those the other night. It scared him. Anyway.
Yes. And so just allow God to work on us and take some time, go back through these scriptures and be aware of current events and things happening and know that good or bad, God is going to use people, whether they know it or not. He did it throughout the Bible, even kings of Babylon and whatever, but God is going to work his way. And what he's doing is trying to get our attention. Again, like we talked about with deism on Sunday school, how God doesn't wind up the clock of earth and set it in motion and then leave it be. No, God is very much involved with the rising and falling of nations and very intimately aware of individuals. He is trying to reach as he's showing himself. Scripture says, seek the Lord, though he is not far from any of us. The Lord is near to him, near to you when you draw near to him, those kind of things. So I pray that these kind of things, while they may be fun to talk about, especially being on the other side of some of these things, we survived, we lived through them. We can look back and see maybe there was a little more going on than we realized at the time. If not everything so literal, maybe there is just an underlying spirit behind the scenes, good and bad. You know, there's a spiritual war taking place. We know that. And it just wouldn't hurt us to be more kind of spiritually mindful as we consider things, especially as they go forward from here. Next week, we will pick up with the COVID connection to abortion and these other things we're looking at and go from there. Any other reactions, thoughts, comments, questions on that? Oh, glad to hear that. Good deal. Try to make it so. And we'll be looking at Psalm 106 next week if you want to take a look at that ahead of time and get some prayer going on that. And with that, we'll go ahead and stop our screen share and I'll get that slide fixed. And we'll stop our recording. Let's get ready to stand and meet in the center aisle and close out in our season of prayer.